From what we've seen thus far of Heinrich Kramer's Malleus Maleficarum, we can easily deduce that this disgruntled inquisitor was not a tremendous fan of women. Whilst he acknowledges that there could be good women and holy women, as evidenced in his biblical studies, women, according to Kramer, were more likely to do wicked things, and women were more likely to fall for the devil's tricks. Why? Well, you ought to consult the last episode in this series, where we learned from Kramer that there were a multitude of reasons why women were more susceptible to Satan's manipulations, or the temptation of magic and demons. Women were wicked by nature, according to Kramer. They were built this way since the days of Eve, who set the first example of women being so easily led astray. Women were not as smart as men, both intellectually and spiritually, and so it was almost expected that they would make the wrong choices. In this instance, take up witchcraft and willingly become the agents of the devil. In Kramer's time, specifically the 15th century, where witchcraft trials were running rampant, the idea of women being subject to evil temptations wasn't really questioned. Women were, after all, the ones being accused of witchcraft for the most part. So in a way, this only fueled the narrative being put out by Kramer, and may have even served as evidence, particularly to the authorities of the Inquisition, that women were chiefly the type to transgress and commit all kinds of terrible sorcery. By chapter 7 of his infamous Hammer of Witches, Kramer puts this sorcery under the spotlight and attempts to underpin one of the so-called powers that witches appear to possess, the ability to sway the minds of men. He tells us, it is asked whether devils, through medium of witches, can change or incite the minds of men to inordinate love or hatred. By now, you're likely expecting Kramer to slam his fist on the table and declare, yes, of course they can sway the minds of men. And that just as Eve had given Adam the apple, which ultimately led to the downfall of man, women by biological association with Eve also had that same potential to derail man by changing or inciting his mind. But instead, Kramer allows for the argument that women are not able to do such things because of the three principles of man: will, understanding, and the body. First, Kramer presents the idea that man's will is ruled by God, and that the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. Ultimately, he tries to tell us here that even though we have free will, God's plan is already in place, and we move towards it regardless of the decisions we make along the way. The second principle of man, understanding, is ruled by an angel, and the third principle, the body, is ruled by the motions of the stars. Now, according to this argument, because demons cannot affect the stars, they cannot affect the changes in the body. Thus, they have less chance of being able to incite love or hatred in the soul. If demons cannot achieve this feat, and if demons are where witches obtain their powers from, then witches are in even less of a position to achieve this themselves. Kramer goes on to tell us that it is only the creator God who can change a creature for better or worse, and that to believe that demons or witches have this kind of power is in fact worse than being a pagan or a heretic. Kramer further adds that if the devil or witches could change the minds of men to either hatred or love, then they must also have the ability to see the inner thoughts of the heart, which is contrary to what is said in the book of Ecclesiastic Dogma, where we are told, the devil cannot see our inner thoughts, and again, in the same place, not all our evil thoughts are from the devil, but sometimes they arise from our own choice. Kramer continues that love and hatred are a matter of will, that which is rooted in the soul. Thus they cannot be affected nor caused by demons. Only he who created the soul, that being God in this example, can have such a power over it, and so by this argument, Kramer leads us to believe that the common conception at that time, that women were bewitching men, could be disproved by this argument. On the other hand though, Kramer also presents an argument that the devil tempts man not only visibly, but also invisibly, suggesting that perhaps the devil, and therefore witches, were able to influence the inner mind. All evil and all filthiness is devised by the devil, he quotes from St. John Damascene to exemplify his point. In order to dissect this idea, Kramer tells us that the cause of anything can be understood in two ways, either direct or indirect. For example, if a man is chopping wood in the forest, he could be seen as the indirect cause of the actual fire. Similarly then, Kramer tells us that the devil can be seen as the cause of all our sins, for he incited the first man to sin, from whose sin has been handed down to the whole human race. With this idea, mankind has a preconceived habit of sinning. We were, in a sense, born to sin, and so this would be an indirect example of the devil having swayed our minds. In terms of the direct cause, our sins become effects of our own choosing. The devil has not influenced us, and we do wicked things with our own personal motives. Kramer quotes from Christian scholar Origen of Alexander that, even if the devil were not, men would still lust after food and venery and such things, and from these inordinate lusts, much may result, unless such appetites be reasonably restrained. But to restrain such ungoverned desire is the part of man's free will, over which even the devil has no power. Now, Kramer adds on to this idea that this concept is not enough to explain how the devil plagues man with infatuations of lust and desire. Indeed, Kramer assumes that a man's temptation of flesh isn't necessarily born out of his own fiendish need, but that this can be further explained by the devil's uncanny ability to persuade man toward his frantic infatuations. This can again take place in one of two ways, either visibly or invisibly. When the devil tempts man visibly, he can appear in the form of his witches and can speak to man materially, persuading them to sin, just as he tempted Adam and Eve in the guise of a serpent. When affecting man invisibly, he does so by either persuasion or disposition. By persuasion, he presents something to the understanding as being a good thing. He makes the man believe it is a good decision by appealing to his intellect, and may even convince him of the harmlessness of the sin in question. Kramer tells us here that luckily, the human intellect can be helped by a good angel to understand this sin, and so whilst a person might fall for the devil's deceptions, a good angel can help him see where he went wrong, and perhaps guide him into not making that same mistake again. Kramer continues to tell us that the enlightened mind, those who have sinned in the past and learned the error of their ways, courtesy of the good angel, are more likely to then resist the devil's subsequent temptations. For the intellect of man is of that condition that the more it is enlightened, the more it knows the truth, and the more it can defend itself from deception. If you believed Kramer would make a more scientific explanation to these notions, then I'm afraid I have some bad news. He actually doubles down on the ideologies and theories by various saints, and begins to move on to the spiritual side of things. He tells us that our bodily nature is naturally born to be moved locally by the spirit. In essence, our physical bodies are moved by our souls, similarly to how Kramer believed they were moved by the stars. Kramer then moves on to what he calls local motion, and how through motion, demons are able to collect semen, referring to the succubi and incubi again, for which they can use for their own evil results. With this idea, it might be said that the devil might not even need to sway the minds of men, because with his demon spawn, they can violate man without even needing him to be conscious. He tells us that with this idea, realistically, there is nothing to prevent demons from affecting people in this way, unless God explicitly forbids it. He continues with this local motion that devils excite fantasy and dreams within man, especially when they sleep. He attempts to name drop Aristotle to reinforce his ideas that when people sleep, blood flows to the inmost seat of the senses, from which fantasy and imagination, which are basically the same thing, are spawned. Now, this fantasy or imagination is described as the treasury of ideas by Kramer, and that demons stir up inner desires based on these images that are produced in our dreams. Kramer does acknowledge that not everyone agrees with this idea, but that if anyone is compelled by the concept, they ought to consult Avicenna in his book on the mind, where there are 5 inner perceptions that must be considered: common sense, fantasy, imagination, thought, and memory. He then talks about how if fantasy is the treasury of ideas, then memory must be the treasury of instincts, which are not received through the senses. For example, when a man sees a wolf, he does not get scared because of its colour or its fur, but rather he gets scared out of instinct, knowing the beast can tear him apart. Now, getting back to the question of how witches and demons can sway the minds of men, Kramer tells us that the demons can create images and apparitions in our minds when we sleep, and that, in another idea, this can also happen to those who are awake. With this idea, demons can stir up and excite the inner perceptions of man, to the point that they begin to believe that the images they are seeing are actually real. Kramer refers to this as interior temptation. He continues that it is no wonder the devil can manipulate man's thoughts when he sleeps, since by the same token, any man by himself who is awake can also generate whatever thoughts that he wants. Put simply, if man can imagine and dream when he is wide awake, it should come as no surprise that the devil can manipulate these imaginings and dreams when he is asleep. Kramer informs us that there are two ways that demons can raise up these kinds of images. Sometimes they trigger man's temptation, and then they let man generate these kinds of images on his own. On the other hand, they might also arrest man's reason and lead him down a path of madness or drunkenness, from which he will easily be manipulated thereafter. Nonetheless, we are told that in order to actually do anything of the sort, the demons still need God's permission in order to play their deceptions on anyone. Interestingly, Kramer then concludes that this is the reason for men who are delirious or mad. With this idea, they are not men suffering poor mental health or some kind of psychosis, but instead men who have had their senses snatched away by demons. This the demons do either with or without the help of witches. Kramer then quotes from Aristotle again, telling us that anyone who lives in passion can be moved by a little thing, such as a man seeing a picture of his wife. The same can be said about a man being moved by hatred, and that all it would take to move him into anger would be to show him a picture of a woman who had scorned him. Through these behaviours, demons have learned exactly what mankind's typical triggers are. They know which buttons to press to affect our mood, and they have learned exactly how to incite the average person towards sin. The demons do this through witchcraft though, and in the instance of witches, Kramer tells us because these women have entered into a pact with the demons in order to manipulate men. Annoyingly though, Kramer concludes this part of his point telling us that it is not possible to talk about these instances in detail because there are simply too many examples to give of men being manipulated by demons and witches. He does give us some anecdotal material to work with though, telling us, "For how many adulterers have put away the most beautiful of wives to lust after the vilest of women?" This is one of the more charged statements of the chapter, because again, Kramer does not believe that the adultering husband is at fault. For what kind of man would betray a beautiful wife in order to sleep with someone less so? Man's natural desire or his folly does not come into question, but rather, Kramer frames man's infidelity as being the result of demonic manipulation, not his own lustful appetite. Kramer doesn't factor in the reasons for men having affairs, beyond that of physical temptation. He simply deems it impossible for a man to become dissatisfied with a beautiful woman, and that the only reason he'd ever cheat on her was because of demonic intervention or witchcraft. Kramer then gives us some details about an old woman he knew, who, according to the common account of the brothers of a monastery, not only bewitched 3 successive abbots, but even killed them. She herself was said to publicly confess it, and continued to confess it even after she had been interrogated. She declared, "I did so and I do so, and they are not able to keep from loving me because they have eaten so much of my dung." It's a pretty grim tale to tell, and despite its brevity, it's uncomfortably graphic. Are we to believe that these abbots were willingly eating the feces of this old woman, who not only survived 3 successions, but also killed 3 of them without anyone realizing? Was her sorcery so tremendous that she was able to get away with it for so long? And if she was, can we safely assume that this was an agent of Satan? Kramer certainly seemed to think so, But the validity of the claim does come into question, because Kramer doesn't tell us the woman's name, nor the name of the monastery where these 3 abbots were murdered in succession. What's interesting is that we actually get a bit of disappointment from Kramer here, who tells us that since he had no evidence to prosecute her or bring her to trial, she was still alive at the time of his writing. At last, Kramer reiterates and concludes that it should be remembered that the devil can invisibly lure man into sin, not only by means of persuasion, but also by the means of disposition. He can incite and rile up those who are prone to anger, and he can tempt and mislead those who lack conviction into betraying the ones they love. Furthermore, it is when a man is aroused, or under the influence, that he is more likely to surrender to the ways of demons and witches, and thus have his mind swayed. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode on the Malleus Maleficarum, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.